The microbiome always seemed like incredibly exciting. Every aspect of our health has been linked with the gut microbiome. And I kept seeing all of these studies come out about how the microbiome was linked to Crohn's disease, to colitis, to Parkinson's, to cancer, to obesity. Today, there are more than 2,000 studies published every single month in PubMed on the microbiome. No doctor can read 2,000 studies a month, or if you do sequencing on this data, really make a lot of sense out of the complexity of the ecosystem in somebody's gut. The estimation is there are about 30 trillion organisms in your gut. There's a universe of more than 11,000 different organisms that have been linked with your health in one peer-reviewed study or another. From an AI standpoint, there's just an incredible amount of data that is providing a real crystal ball into your health, and that is really hard to look at and see through other kinds of diagnostic testing methods, not through imaging, not through blood work. Really, the microbiome gives you a unique window on human health.
Leo Grady, founder and CEO of Jona, a very warm welcome to the Scope Forward show. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Praveen. It's great to be here.
Leo, I've been fascinated by the microbiome space. It's very interesting that I came across your company, because of Dr. Larry Kozinski, who is also part of your company. I've noticed that gastroenterologists have not really played an active role in the shaping of the microbiome industry and this space, but Jona seems to be different. So I'd love to know a lot more about it, your role in GI, but let me back up a little bit first. Why did you get started with Jona?
It's a number of reasons. I've been fascinated by the microbiome for a long time. My father was a virologist, so I grew up in microbiology labs. I ultimately went on to do my PhD in AI and work in a variety of different aspects of healthcare, building AI for radiology, for cardiology, for pathology, as well as investing in AI companies in healthcare. But the microbiome always seemed like incredibly exciting. Every aspect of our health has been linked with the gut microbiome. And I kept seeing all of these studies come out about how the microbiome was linked to Crohn's disease, to colitis, to Parkinson's, to cancer, to obesity. The problem that it seemed to me was that the data itself was complex, the microbiome was complex, and it seemed like an opportunity for AI to really help us analyze this very difficult data and make clinical use out of it. And then the other part of it that was exciting to me is the fact that we can change the microbiome. It's modifiable through lifestyle interventions as well as through medications. And so because of the importance of the microbiome to our health, and because the thing that I specialize in, AI, was really so deeply connected to what I thought was solving some of the core problems with clinical translation of the microbiome. That's really why I started Jona and why I got into the field.
What is Jona?
So Jona is a company. We started off by really tackling this question of complexity, because it's not only the complexity of the microbiome itself, 30 trillion organisms, 1,000 times the DNA in those organisms compared to your human DNA, dynamically changing over time, but it's also the literature. Today, there are more than 2,000 studies published every single month in PubMed on the microbiome. No doctor can read 2,000 studies a month, or if you do sequencing on this data, really make a lot of sense out of the complexity of the ecosystem in somebody's gut. So what we did at Jona is we built an AI system to read all of those studies. We offer a gut microbiome test. So it's a stool sample, you send it off to the lab. We do deep shotgun metagenomic sequencing on that sample. We identify everything in your gut down to a strain level. And then the AI matches the patterns in your personal microbiome test results to every study that's ever been published. And so we can say for you, your microbiome fits the profile of everything from bloating and diarrhea and brain fog, all the way to Crohn's disease or IBS or colitis, or even cancer. Then the AI goes a step further, reads all the interventional literature on how you can change your microbiome through diet, lifestyle, supplements, and medications. And we make a digital twin of your gut. And we say, what do you look like if you go vegan, for example? And we know based on all the interventional literature how going vegan is going to shift your gut microbiome. So we can apply that shift digitally, and we can make a virtual vegan version of you, taking your existing test results as the starting point. And then we can do the same thing with keto or gluten-free or Mediterranean diet. And digitally, virtually, we can give you every dietary change, every lifestyle change, every supplement, every medication, and really figure out what is going to address some of the deficiencies and challenges that have been observed in your gut microbiome. Everything is evidence-based, so it all loops back to citations in PubMed. We're able to tell you how much evidence there is, both for the analysis of your microbiome as well as the interventions.
Leo, I want to get to the science of the microbiome itself and get to the science aspect of Jona a little bit. And I'm going to get to the very, very basics. I recall several years ago seeing a picture of the microbiome on the cover of The Economist. I'm sure you're familiar with that. It's been several years since that point. I've read at one point that it's 90% of the DNA in your body and 10% being your human DNA. At some points, I've read it's 60%, and then the rest is human DNA. Is there a consensus? Where have we arrived as far as how vast the microbiome is? In a recent interview that I did, it was with a gastroenterologist. When we talked about the microbiome, his first reaction or response to that was, oh, it's a universe and it's an expanding universe. So is there a certain consensus on how vast the microbiome is, and do we even know?
There's a number of estimates. I think you're quoting some of those, and it's going to vary from person to person. What we can say is that the estimation is there are about 30 trillion organisms in your gut. There's a universe of more than 11,000 different organisms that have been linked with your health in one peer-reviewed study or another. Your personal gut microbiome probably contains only a few hundred species. So out of those more than 11,000 different species that have been linked to human health, your personal microbiome is only going to contain a few hundred of those. And even within your microbiome, there's a good percentage of those organisms that we don't have names for. Anywhere from 5 to 20%, I've seen studies that have identified, and we see this too at Jona, where we don't even know the names of a lot of the organisms in your gut. There's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of mystery, but from an AI standpoint, there's just an incredible amount of data that is providing a real crystal ball into your health, and that is really hard to look at and see through other kinds of diagnostic testing methods, not through imaging, not through blood work. Really, the microbiome gives you a unique window on human health.
There are these theories that the microbiome came together to form the human body. We think that we are hosting the microbiome, but it could be the other way around, where the microbiome actually got together, started forming, and then the body came about around it. And I can tell you where I heard this too. It was one of the interviews that I heard founder of Biome described as the microbiome. I'm just curious to know, do you have a take on that? Or have you discovered anything a little bit more substantial on the origins of the microbiome itself?
From an evolutionary standpoint, all organisms have evolved in a sea of microbes. I mean, we even know that mitochondria used to be different organisms before they fused with the cell. So there was never a situation of an organism that was in a sterile environment versus, an organism being built around the gut microbiome. They really co-evolved together. We know today, because we're able to raise mice, gnotobiotic mice, in clean situations so that they're sterile, that they can survive without a gut microbiome. I mean, these studies obviously have never been done in humans, but we know that mice can survive without a microbiome, but they're not healthy. We also know that a person's microbiome is often seeded through their method of birth, as well as lifestyle and what happens to them over the course of their lives. As you know, antibiotics, food poisoning, infections, all of these things can have dramatic and very quick effects on the microbiome. And so it really reflects an accumulation of the person's life as well as their lifestyle and their current environment.
Let's get back to the company and the business aspects of things. There are several microbiome startups out there. There's a substantial amount of funding that's gone into this space, and I've conversed with several gastroenterologists about the direction of where things are going. You hear many different things. Like, so one is there's this whole mushrooming effect of all of these startups that are being funded. So there's something that's attracting funding to the space. But when you look at the clinical side, from the clinician's angle side, they dismiss, some of them are dismissive. They say that, no, it's all too early. We clearly don't have answers yet. There's no clear data to support one way or the other. I'm curious to know what you have to say and what prompted you to get into the space when already there were several other startups.
Well, I think there are two questions there, right? One question is, what are these other startups doing? How are we different? Why jump into it? And I think the second question you're asking is there anything clinically meaningful that can be said about the microbiome today?
Thank you. Yeah.
So from the standpoint of the first question, the reason I started the company is because I personally was really disappointed by all of these other tests and these other companies. As somebody who likes to test himself and measure everything and all of that, as well as a number of family members who have colitis, who have Crohn's, who've taken some of these tests, what I discovered is that for the most part, they're vehicles to sell supplements. These tests will say, your microbiome is no good. We're going to ship you our supplements. We'll make you better. I can't speak to the science behind any of their supplements, but the thing that frustrated me was that we know how there are a lot of studies on the link between Crohn's disease and the gut microbiome. There are a lot of studies between the links between colon cancer and the gut microbiome, pancreatic cancer, colitis, IBS, diarrhea, constipation, liver cirrhosis, NASH, all of these things. All that was missing from any of these tests that were out there today. And when I dug in to try to understand why, it's really because it's very difficult to analyze this data. And as I mentioned, 2,000 studies every month in PubMed on the microbiome. And so trying to put together what's actually known and operationalize that to interpret somebody's gut microbiome test results was actually a very challenging technical problem. And, as I mentioned, I'm an AI PhD. My whole team are AI experts and PhDs. It took us about a year and a half just to build an AI system that could reliably extract this information out of these studies and then analyze the very complex data in the gut microbiome, even though all we were trying to do was connect your microbiome test results to these study results. That's an approach that none of these other companies have taken. These other companies are really out there trying to sell you supplements or foods and giving you gut scores and all sorts of things. But there was really nothing from a clinical, nothing from an actionability, nothing from a evidence-based side of things that was out there, or still is. Jona is the only company that's got this sort of technology and really aiming to connect current microbiome science evidence to gut microbiome analysis. Now, to your second question, do we know anything? Well, today our AI has read over 200,000 studies on the microbiome. So is there more to know? Of course. Do we understand all of the complexity of the microbiome? Not at all. But we do know something. And one of the things I heard in the beginning when I was starting the company is people would say, oh, these studies are contradictory, they are inconclusive. It's not really what we found. Yes, there are some examples of contradictory studies, some very small studies, but effectively what our AI is doing is an automated meta-analysis where we're looking at 60 studies on Crohn's disease and the gut microbiome and applying the findings in each of those studies to the analysis of this data. And we're weighting each study by study quality. So if it's a large cohort, high quality journal, it's going to have a higher weight than a study that's got a smaller cohort and a lower quality journal. And so as a result, whatever is known, we're able to bring to bear to offer the physician or to the patient all of the information that's known today. So yes, there's still more to learn, but there's a lot more known than most people seem to appreciate.
Coming back to your business model and operating model, how does it work from the standpoint of a patient and standpoint of a provider?
So typically the provider would be ordering the test for the patient. It's all cash pay, but we do accept HSA, FSA. But this is legally, it's a wellness test because what we're doing is we're connecting you to existing literature. So it's not a diagnostic, it's not a medical device, it's not reimbursed by insurance today. It's really classified as a wellness device because the fact that we're just connecting your microbiome test results to the literature. So everything is cash pay at the moment. A lot of who we work with are more on the concierge medicine side, executive health side, longevity clinics, but increasingly conventional GI docs, GI practices, as well as academic medical centers are starting to adopt Jona under wellness lines where they are really looking to extend their services to patients that are asking about it. And they want to make sure that they have something that is evidence-based, that's using all of the available science to offer the best information that they can to their patients.
How many people have gone through the test? What kind of data do you already have?
We launched last year in beta. We were really iterating on the product, iterating with a few sites, a few clinics before really scaling up for the end of the year. I don't remember the exact number. It's many thousands of people that have done Jona so far. We're working with more than 100 clinics and growing really quickly. In addition, we've scraped all of the public data that's out there. We're able to use that as references and reference ranges for everyone.
My follow-up question, the reason for wanting that information is to know what insight have you gathered from all of this data? What have you learned?
We've learned a lot of things, actually. Some of the things that have surprised me is how frequently we are finding unusual organisms in people's gut. We find amoebas, we find parasites, we find all sorts of different things in people's guts. And very frequently see also a huge range of different enterotypes, types of gut microbiome configurations. There are some people that are associated with almost every dysbiotic state that's in the literature. And then there are some people that are associated with almost no challenges in the literature. And then you have some people that are really linked with, all of the metabolic conditions or all the thyroid related conditions or all of the neurodegenerative related conditions or whatnot. And so it's been very surprising to me that there's so much variability between different individuals when we really get down and look at their gut microbiome.
Interesting. And what must be causing this difference between one individual to the other? And do you also see the differences within the same family?
It's a good question. I don't think we have really analyzed familial connections as very much. There is literature on that, though, where the overlap between family members in their gut microbiome is quite a bit higher than it is between individuals, even in the same community. Mothers to children that live in the same household have a greater overlap than fathers to children. Siblings have a greater overlap than in the general public. But it's still not really high. It's not like siblings have the same gut microbiome. It's just at a higher level of overlap than two strangers that may live in the same town. So what explains that variability? I think it's really, all of the factors, right? It's genetics, it's environmental, it's lifestyle, it's diet, it's seasons, the temperature changes, level of exercise. I mean, when we see all the different things that can impact the gut microbiome, it's not surprising that there's a lot of variability out there. But from a health standpoint, it's really fascinating because we are seeing some people who may present with fewer symptoms, but have a lot of underlying trouble in their microbiome, at least according to the current literature, whereas other people, really have pretty clean microbiomes. It's fascinating to see how much variability there is.
Do you see also differences in ethnicities? Like, so have you done any studies seeing these differences?
There are published studies on that where, not surprisingly, you do see greater similarities among people that are genetically linked. Interestingly, there have been some studies that have come out recently that show even social connections, people in the same social circle, but in the same community, have a greater overlap in their microbiome than people who don't, which is interesting because if you are familiar with some of the literature that came out 10, 20 years ago about people who are friends, if one person's obese, the next person is more likely to be obese, or if one person's thin, the next person's likely to be thin. And it was always thought that that was purely social pressure. But given the additional overlap in somebody's microbiome that we're finding through these social connections, it's actually raising the possibility that some of those similarities are actually more biologically based and not purely social.
Very, very interesting. That's quite fascinating to know. I want to draw our conversation to gastroenterology itself. What kind of patient successes have you seen, people using your solution, make changes, and then they come back and then maybe use it again? Are there any stories that you can share with certain specific GI conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot. I mean, the way in which we're seeing Jona being used by physicians clinically is really in three ways. One is to analyze pathogens and parasites and anything that's serious that's found in somebody's gut. The second is really looking for clues for diagnosis. If somebody comes in with more general, non-specific symptoms, and you can look at their gut microbiome, and it looks like they have a significant association with liver disease or thyroid disease or autoimmune conditions, it can help guide further diagnostic inquiry, which we've seen in many different cases. And then the last is really on the management piece, how you can build an interventional plan that includes lifestyle, diet, lifestyle, supplement that are going to be personalized for that individual and evidence-based to really address what they do. And I should point out, we don't sell any supplements or recommend any brands or foods or anything like that. It's very important for us to be completely unbiased here. In terms of stories, there are tons. Actually, the one that made the most impact on me personally was my son. So he's in his teens. His mother has Crohn's disease. He's had gut issues since he was a kid. And about a year ago or more, he was having severe abdominal pain. And when that was around the time that we actually got the technology together and we were doing our first Jona tests. So we tested his microbiome and we saw a very strong signature for abdominal pain according to the literature. And what I mean is that there was a pattern in his microbiome that had been significantly linked with abdominal pain. And then and there were ways in which there were interventions that could actually change that pattern and move it away from this pattern that was linked to abdominal pain. And specifically for him, what that entailed was to dial down lactose and galacto-oligosaccharides, beans and legumes, things like that, to dial up healthy fats and polyphenols, And then there were specific organisms that you could buy in commercial probiotics that could also help move his microbiome in that direction. And so we made these changes with his diets. I got him a supplement, and it made a huge difference for him. And he really hasn't had that issue since. Whereas before, there were days that he missed school, and I really couldn't even, there was nothing I could get at the drugstore that would help him. So that was the one that made the biggest impression on me. And it was really, like I said, around the time that we first developed the technology and got the first tests going, and just seeing it work for him so well was hugely inspiring for us to be able to go out and do this at a greater scale.
How often did you test him? How many months apart? I think what I'm trying to ask is, how long did it take for the microbiome to shift based on the changes that you did with diet and everything else?
So in the literature, most of these studies are observing changes, over the course of maybe 6 to 8 weeks after making dietary interventions. Obviously, there's some interventions that can have faster changes. If you were to take an antibiotic, for example, your microbiome changes very quickly. So typically, we would say, expect somewhere in the order of 6 to 8 weeks in order to see that microbiome change. For him, it happened faster than that, quite a bit faster than that. But that's what most of these studies show in terms of making these changes with your microbiome. The way that we think about, longitudinal testing is something like the way in which, at least for me, that I would approach blood work. If somebody has a chronic condition, they're trying to make changes, you may do it more frequently. If somebody is, interested in general wellness and doing a checkup, then you may do it, once a year.
Let's talk about AI, Leo. I'm curious to know how you've applied AI. I get it generally, but you said your team of engineers. Did you build your own algorithm, or are you using one of the LLMs which are out there? How are you approaching it?
The LLMs that are out there are not going to do what we need to do. So we had to build our own custom system. And if I can break it down a little bit, there are a few stages in the AI. I mean, first of all, you have to look at this. The AI has to read a paper and say, this is a study that's on the gut microbiome. This is a study that's in humans. This is a study that used sequencing techniques, that the subjects were ages 5 and older, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so the first step is the AI just has to identify that this is a relevant study that we can use to apply to somebody's gut microbiome. And then when it identifies that this is a study that's relevant, then it has to extract all of that information accurately. The cohort size was 500 people. Half of them had Crohn's disease, half of them didn't. The demographics were 70% women, 30% men, this age range. Within the Crohn's group, certain organisms were higher, certain organisms were lower. These organisms were statistically significant, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of that information has to be extracted out of the study accurately. And further complicating that is the fact that you have studies that are done at different levels. You may have one study that's done on Crohn's disease, you may have another study that's done on IBD. And so you need to know that Crohn's disease is a type of IBD. Some studies may be done at a species level, some may be done at a genus level. And so again, you need to know that these studies at the species level feed into the genus level, and that you need to be able to understand how all these studies relate to each other. So that's the second step, just pulling all of that information out accurately and doing it in a way where we can quality control and make sure that the information is pulled accurately. ChatGPT, like one of these LLMs, they're not built for analysis. They're built to generate text. They're built to generate language. They're not really built to extract specific kinds of information from specific kinds of studies. Then the next step is the meta-analysis side. So now that we've looked at 60 studies on Crohn's disease, each one found slightly different results, and now we're looking at your microbiome, then the AI has to figure out how to combine all of these studies into a meta-analysis that really says, for you, your microbiome either in aggregate fits the profile of Crohn's across all these studies or not. And so the way in which we do that is we basically go study by study by study, and we say, according to study one, does your microbiome fit the profile of Crohn's as described in study one? And it's never binary. It's always like partially yes, partially no. And then we do the same thing for study two, study three, study four, study five. And then we do a weighted average across all of those studies, again, weighting by study quality. And then that gives you a measure of your link between your microbiome and Crohn's disease. But then we have to go the step further with the digital twin and say, now if you were to adopt a Mediterranean diet, it changes your microbiome in a certain way, right? And so we have to do the same thing kind of in reverse. We have to go through all of these studies. Is this a study about the Mediterranean diet? What were the changes before and after the Mediterranean diet to the microbiome that were statistically significant? What was the cohort? There may be one study on olive oil. There may be another study on the Mediterranean diet. Olive oil is a component of the Mediterranean diet. So again, we need this sort of taxonomy of interventions as well. Some of them are lifestyle interventions, some of them are dietary interventions, some of them are medications. And so again, we have to pull all of that together into a way to say, okay, for you, if you were to adopt a Mediterranean diet, according to these studies, this is how it would shift your microbiome. And then apply that shift digitally and then redo the analysis in light of that shift. So I don't know if that made sense, but it's a very custom domain specific AI system that we had to build, very technically challenging. And it's not something that you can just take an off the shelf model, ask ChatGPT a prompt and say, and be able to trust anything it says.
I'm getting that. However, there was another question that popped in my head as you were narrating what your AI, custom AI does. If you look at where Grok is or where ChatGPT is, ChatGPT launched this deep research and Grok has deep and deeper, research angles, and I've used some of it. It goes into a fair level of depth. Now, I know that it may not suit specific contexts such as yours, but will it get there, a year or two from now? Because things are doubling very, very quickly. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think what people don't fully appreciate is that Grok, deep research, these are language models, right? The input is language, papers. The output is language, a summary, that's detailed. They're not built to analyze data, right? In our case, the input is an incredible amount of data about your microbiome. Your E. coli level is this. Your Akkermansia level is that. Your lactobacillus level is this. Different species. And then to basically operationalize the literature in a specific way to analyze that data is not something that's going to magically appear out of these models, again, because they are general purpose language models that input language and output language. They don't input data and output an analysis that is systematic and measured and ultimately linked in provenance. So I think we're all impressed by these language models, and I think I told you I did my PhD in AI 20 years ago. But it's important not to understand what they are and like what they're good at and what they're not good at. And at the end of the day, a language model is not going to drive a car. It's not going to fly an airplane. It's not going to look at an image and understand what's going on. In order to be able to do all of those things, you need different kinds of models. And so a language model is great for summarizing research, summarizing literature, generating, even writing a grant for you or things like that. It's not going to be good at analyzing a lot of complex data and producing outputs. We can do that with AI, but a language model is not the right tool.
What's the closest analogy to how you are using AI? It can be outside of healthcare, but does anything come to mind?
There's nothing that comes to mind. No, actually.
Okay.
A lot of the AI systems that I've been building in my career, These were FDA approved. We had the first Medicare payment for an AI product in healthcare at HeartFlow. These were all analyzing images and saying, here's a tumor, there's cancer, here's your heart, there's the coronaries, this is, obstructive blood flow, et cetera, et cetera. It was all handling very different kinds of data. And those were all built really for detection, analysis, and, ultimately as diagnostic tools. What we've done here is really very different in the sense that we basically built an engine to do meta-analysis, but personalized meta-analysis based on your specific microbiome. And I can't think of any system that exists out there that does something similar. I mean, we have AI all around us, whether it's, TikTok recommending, videos, or Netflix, or, credit card fraud alerts, when you swipe your credit card. But this sort of ongoing scientific meta-analysis that's being applied on a personalized basis to your biological data, can't think of anything that's similar to that.
Let's talk about the future as we wrap up our conversation, Leo. You are building the future and you're bringing the future to the present. But I want to ask you, if this was wildly successful, and if you put all this on momentum, where do you see Jona go, or the impact that it could have? And if you can contextualize that to gastroenterology in particular, that'll be great. That's one part. And the second part, and a related question, is how does all this fit in with the other tests, which are doing the rounds? There's several biomarkers, there's several tests representing these biomarkers. Do you see the microbiome combining with those biomarkers, and how we deliver care differently in the future?
Well, let me take the second question first. So we know that the gut microbiome is linked to Crohn's disease, to colitis, to psoriasis, to eczema, to Parkinson's, to Alzheimer's, depression, anxiety, NASH, obesity, like you name it. There are more than 1,000 different health conditions that have been linked with the gut microbiome. Now, what we don't know is whether we can build a panel diagnostic for all of those different conditions, but it seems quite possible that we can build a panel diagnostic for a wide range of them. And today you see blood tests coming out for Parkinson's disease. We have Cologuard for colorectal cancer. You see these liquid biopsy companies that want to do, blood testing for, a basket of different cancers. It certainly seems possible for us to build a microbiome test that tests for hundreds, if not thousands, of different diseases that can be used both as a screening tool and as a diagnostic tool as we go forward. So I don't think there's any other test that's out there that has that same potential to span everything from autoimmune conditions to neurological conditions to obesity to metabolic disease to skin disease. So I really feel like the microbiome is uniquely positioned as both a diagnostic and as a screening tool. In terms of what does it mean in the future of medicine, well, a lot of people talk about the microbiome as a new organ. I hear this all the time that it's a new organ. But almost every organ has a branch of medicine associated with it. You have cardiology, you have neurology, you have GI. I can absolutely see a world in the future where the microbiome is its own specialty in medicine. And if it's its own specialty in medicine, then what we need to do is build the foundation of tools to analyze the microbiome. Right now, we can do an MRI of the liver or the heart or the brain. We don't have an MRI of the microbiome. And what we're doing at Jona, I really see is building that imaging tool to be able to take that data and actually make sense of it in the same way that you would an MRI of the brain. And so I see as we go forward and we bring these tools to clinical care and the GI world and the clinical world starts adopting them, that there will be almost a whole new branch of medicine that allows somebody to really look deeply at diagnosing somebody as well as treating them through the lens of their microbiome.
Thank you. That was a very powerful answer and very, very helpful. I want to close by asking you a final question, Leo. So many of the people listening in are from a GI background. And what advice or suggestion would you have for them? Because the bulk of the GI space, the industry is not playing a role in shaping this space of the microbiome. And I'm very intrigued by what you said, that it can become its own specialty. So if it's going in that direction and GI is not playing that much of a role now, I'm curious to see, from somebody who has insight into the future and is playing in this space, what advice or suggestion would you have for somebody from the GI community?
I'd actually disagree with you. I think that when I was starting Jona and I was thinking about which area of medicine to align with and where all of the action in the microbiome was happening, and if that split were to happen, what discipline would it split out of to form its own branch of medicine? I came to the conclusion that it is GI where all of that work is happening and where this is going to branch off from. And I spent a lot of time talking to cancer researchers. I spent time in cardiology, in neurology, in endocrinology, areas that have been touched by the microbiome. And I can tell you that going to DDW, you see 10 times the amount of studies, presentations, effort, and emphasis on the microbiome that you do in any other clinical conference out there. And furthermore, today, we're seeing Jona adopted, even as is today, by GI practices. And it's not neurology, it's not oncology, it's GI practices that are really leading the way here in adopting this technology and using it as a different lens to look at the health of their patients. I actually believe that the GI is the place where we're going to see the embrace and ultimately the maturation of the microbiome as a discipline in medicine that may split in the future.
I love it. And I'm so glad that's how you're seeing it. Any final comments, Leo, as we bring our conversation to a close?
I'll just say, to continue on with the GI, our chief medical officer is Dr. Larry Kaczynski, who's been involved in the AGA and really in the GI world for a long time. It's certainly his firm belief that GI is where the microbiome needs to be cultivated and ultimately translated into patient care. And so I've been really excited to work with Dr. Kaczynski as well as all of our partners out there to see how this technology can be used in clinical care. And even though we're still at the beginning, we're already seeing so many exciting wins and stories of people and patients who've been able to ultimately identify root causes in their health and then take interventions, sometimes very basic lifestyle interventions, that can make a huge difference in their health. I'm really excited about where we are, the future of this discipline, and working with the GI community to grow it and to ultimately increase patient care.
So, Leo Grady, thank you so much. You're the founder and CEO of Jona. This was a fantastic conversation, very, very insightful for me. It was like an updated lesson about the microbiome, and I really appreciate everything that you've shared. Thank you once again for coming on the Scope Forward show.
Thanks so much, Praveen.